Okay, so active solidarity. Now we're going to talk about what that means and exactly, how this plays out. But I have a different way to frame this. So I want to start this a little different than maybe a person might suspect. Okay, this was in the article, Civilization of Love. Now that's nice, right? Does anybody want to be in a civilization of love? I mean, it's almost cliche, right? It's like when somebody doesn't feel good or somebody passes away, I'll keep you in my thoughts and prayers. I mean, it's like second nature for a Christian to shoot something like that out. And the thing is with a cliche, is that cliches by definition, are unoriginal, right? And they're overused. That's what the cliche is. Interestingly enough, if you like etymology, it comes from like the printing business where they would like make dyes off of certain things. Like it was like the plural of clicks. I guess the French word click. But nonetheless, so it was something that we repeated, right? But when something is unoriginal and when something is overused, that doesn't mean it's not true. At least it's a goal, right? I mean, so we always say, why can't we always get along? That's very cliche. But it's also something that we would really like. We don't know maybe how to get there, but it's unrealized, which is why we keep saying it. Because if for some reason we all got along, nobody would say that anymore. The same thing with this. It does sound cliche, a civilization of love. But, how do you get there, right? So, when we ask about are all these cliche, the answer is yes. But that doesn't just discount it. We've got to work around this a little bit, right? We've got to figure out why is this unrealized, and how are we contributing to it? I mean, wouldn't that be a shame, right? If two people aren't getting along, then this is much bigger than two people. But if two people weren't getting along, and you realize at some point, man, I'm part of the issue. I'm part of the problem. You would like to know that. It'd be, it's as we go through this here today, this self-analysis, the self-reflection that's examined, to use a Jesuit term, right? It's difficult sometimes. It makes us confront ourselves. I always thought it'd be really cool to get people like in your life, family, friends, people who don't like you, and put them in an environment where they would talk about you freely, but they had no idea that you were listening in. That'd be hard. But it'd also be very enlightening. I mean, talk about getting it straight. It's like, God, do I really do that, right? I mean, that kind of stuff would be interesting. So we're going to have to like self-examine as we go through here and say, how do we contribute in a positive way or even a negative way? So I'm going to start out by picking on something, right? And I'm not going to make a big deal. You don't have to worry about the notes on this so much. This is John Lennon's Imagine. It's a popular song. Now, yes, it's nihilistic, and yes, it's atheistic. And as a theologian, that's not my issues with it, right? And I'm a huge Beatle fan, by the way. I mean, I come here in the morning. If you listen to Magic, the rock station here in Philly, they have breakfast with Beatles every morning, so I'm into that. But I've always had a problem with this song, because and I'm not trying to be overly critical, but I am being critical. I find it to be, in a sense, unoriginal, which maybe, okay, that's not a bad thing. But I don't find it necessarily clever. And I'm not quite, I think it's a little almost like I would call it intellectually dishonest with itself. Like, so when it sounds appealing on the front, right? Like, imagine there's no religion, imagine, well, isn't this terrible? I probably could, if I start from the beginning, I probably could have sang the whole thing. Let's see. Imagine there's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no countries, there's no religion, there's no possessions too, no need for greed or hunger, just a brotherhood of man, nothing to kill or die for. That sounds good, because the way that you bring people together often is by removing divisions. So if we can remove all these divisions, does this create a society that brings us all together? But it doesn't really give me like any of the foundations on how this is going to happen. And I realize this is not, the encapsulation of all his thoughts. So I'm not trying to be overly critical. I'm only talking about this particular song. But what about things like truth? I mean, what a person considers to be true in their lives. And this can be concerning all types of things, economic, society, culture. Those things divide. Are you willing to get rid of, truth? Like, for instance, like, what if we said, there is no such, again, I should have, I got to have the song in my head. What if we say there's no truth? It's easy if you try, nothing to lie, no reason to exaggerate, nothing to divide us. I mean, could you imagine now, maybe on a first hint that would say, hey, well, okay, that's fine too. But even think like in college. What if we said, imagine a world where there's no tests, there's no textbooks, There's no exams, there's no papers, there's no professors, there's no degrees. What does that leave you with? No truth, no knowledge, you know? In other words, once we say that there's nothing to live or die for, we're right up against, then what is the meaning of life? We never get away from those types of arguments, right? So, you know, I don't like the vision behind it. And again, I don't think just because you can say there's nothing there, because it is nihilistic, right? There's nothing there, which means we can really accept anything, which in the end, we're going to call something. I know that sounds a little odd, but I really think that's how you analyze it. You can't say there's nothing, pretend it's anything, and then call it something. You know, so we have to watch, and we have to watch it in our context too, that we don't have some vague recollection or vague collection of what that is. You know, we need something material that we could put our teeth down on. G.K. Chesterton often said, like everybody says, you have to have an open mind, right? And that's true. You should have an open mind. But he compared it to an open mouth. An open mouth is only worth keeping open until you can chew down on something solid. And nobody has an open mind on some things, right? I mean, if I told you, like, maybe racism's good, you should have an open mind. I don't think you're going to say, okay, sounds good to me. There are things that we have determined. So truths, you know, what I'm getting at here overall is we can never disconnect the love that we're trying to express from a truth. You can't do it. If we get so vague in our reasoning that it seems like we're all together, we're really not all together. That's very illusionary. What holds us together? What are the parameters of our group? It's great to say, well, can't we think that we're all just part of the human species? Yeah, that's right, because that would get rid of the racism and prejudice and everything, and I think that's a good thing. But on the other hand, what is this human person? What's the relationship of truth to this human person? I mean, all these parameters, you can never get around those questions. And you can see even people that critiquing the free thought and love ideas of the 60s. Like, we were onto something, we also missed something. You know, we were tapping into something that seemed there, right? Because it's a universal longing for us as a people to live in this civilization of love. How do you define love? Are we just going to leave it as a vague feeling, like I won't bother you and you won't bother me? It's easy to get along with people who never have like a strong opinion on something. They're very easy to get along with because they don't rub you the wrong way. That's your thing, this is my thing. But ask yourself then, what pisses you off? What do you stand up for? I mean, something has to be there, right? So we're going to try to find a way to see if we can't bridge the gap here. So you read in those statistics, at least you should have in your article, the global village statistics. Now, statistics are a dangerous thing, right? You can really make them say a lot of things that you want. So let's watch how we use those. And if you use statistics in any of your essays or such, which you're more than welcome to do, not only make sure you're getting to the bottom of it, but make sure that you're pointing out the weakness in it too. Because, you know, I even show you like the statistics that I got here from Global Village Statistics. They too can be misinterpreted, right? So we have to watch how we use them. But they still can tell us something overall, okay? So I went to their website, and it didn't tell us exactly how they got to everything, because I'm not here interested in, you know, using this as the final position on what my point is. Even if they're off, they're not off by 80% probably, right? So if you know, we have what, roughly 33 people in this room. So if we pretended the world was no bigger than 3 classrooms, if we could just expand this by 2 more, all the people in this room is the entire world. That's what these statistics are based on, all right? So they take the 7 billion people and they squeeze them down to a percentage to say it's 100 people. So 77 of us in this room, if we were, let's just picture it bigger, you know, we'd have shelter, but 61 of us would not have, you know, something that was suitable for a human person. 23 of us would have no shelter. We would just be, you know, living outside. 13 of us would have no access to electricity. 22, no electricity. 18 wouldn't read or write. 7, and this went up like in the last decade. It went up from like 1 or 2 to 7. Would have some degree. Now, I don't know what they mean by that. Is it high school? I really couldn't figure it out. But nonetheless, I don't care if it's college. That's still pretty significant, right? 15, this one's pretty disquieting. 15 are malnourished. 1 person's actually dying of starvation, but 21 are overweight. This, by the way, is not you know, $2 in some other foreign exchange. This would be is like, well, if I had $2 and I lived in, you know, a very rural part of, you know, Australia, maybe it won't be so bad. No, this is like $2 if you had to live here, right? So for, just less than 50% live on $2, less than $2 a day, and then 20 live on less than 1. So 1/5. I mean, that's poverty, right? So even like we say we're poor here in the United States, we're not that poor, right? So if you have like $10 somewhere, that, you know, you're pretty much in the top 10% in the world. We don't think like that, right? We always compare ourselves to the house down at the bottom of the street. It's a lot bigger than mine, so we think they're doing better than me, that type of thing. All right? Another statistics, we're going to talk a little bit about economics the end of next week. But I thought this was interesting because I heard, you know, since the election, now, you know, I guess they said the market likes checks and balances, so they like the fact that the House went Democrat. Now there's going to be some checks and balances going on, so the stock market rallied up. What does that mean for the average person? I mean, does the average person have anything significant? I mean, they see the stock markets go up and down. You can't turn on a news channel without seeing this thing scroll underneath. Well, this is from 2016. Look at that. 80% of the people in the United States own less than 7% of the stock. And those are probably, you know, mutual funds in their retirement plan. All right, I don't know. The top 1%, 40%. The top 10%, 83%. I'm sorry. The top 80% have 93% of all stocks. So where is this going? Now, you know, these are issues. We're going to say, like, what do we do about this? What do you and I do about it? Well, I'm not quite sure. You know, we're going to see how these things have changed, not today, over the course of time. And we'll even see, like, what does it mean to be in the top 10%? If you go, like, to government statistics, if the family makes, I think it's like, you can make $150,000 to $180,000 a year, be the top 10% in the United States. So you hear all this talk about the 1%ers. Well, let's not talk too much about the 1%ers, let's talk about the 10%ers. That's a big group, right? When you're talking, like, you might hear, well, the average wage now is like $56,000. Well, it is, but you ought to see how many people live under that. It's an average because some people are making quite a bit of money. You know, so what are these disparities, right? I mean, we can't, like, hold our finger. You know, in other words, you hear people say sometimes, you know, I wish that the socialists would love the poor as much as they hate the capitalists. It's probably true. Or you might hear, I wish the capitalists would love the poor as much as they love profit. That's probably true too. I mean, so, you know, nobody gets out of this issue. But we're going to build on this. This is supposed to be, if we want a civilization of love, we want to overcome injustices, we got to recognize where do they exist. And if we're frustrated that we see them and don't know what to do about them, that's okay. I mean, we have to recognize them before we go anywhere, okay? So what the Catholic Church then says through all this is, you want to talk about evangelization? This is evangelization. Nothing in Catholic social teaching is going to make any sense or have any resounding you know, fervor with anybody. In other words, our Christian mission is going to be hollow if we don't address these issues. And if somebody says, yeah, but don't a lot of people within the church live well, well, if you don't like that, then, you know, go against that too. I'm not here to support that. But nonetheless, you know, this has to be addressed. You can't just tell somebody, you know, hey, I'm going to pray for you. I hope things get better. I mean, once we recognize the solidarity that we're in with these people, we're going to realize that maybe we shouldn't worry about other people taking care of us. Well, I'll do it. That kind of thing. Right? And it could be in little ways. Like, I have a friend, he's a philosopher, he lives up the main line a little bit. He collects socks for homeless people. He's not the one that distributes them. It's just a little thing. And he says, you know, you go and ask homeless people, like, what is it that you need besides food? The next thing out of their mouth is typically socks. You know? So, little things, right? So, the article talks about internal and external justice, right? So this internal justice is like us being made right with God. Like, how are, you know, if justice is to give unto their due and to create this fairness, some of you guys use that term, how do we get back into a right relationship with God? That's internal justice, right? So it involves grace and it involves our actions too. But our actions turn into this external justice, right? Like, now, if we're in right relationship with God, that should put us in a position where we seek out to be in right relationship with society and other people. So this me and Jesus understanding, you know, that has arisen, especially in the United States evangelical culture, is kind of an antithetical to this. It's not you and anybody. It's us, you know. And the reason why I like the statistics of bringing it down into 100 people is like, I should have done it. Next semester I'm going to do it with 30. So it's just obvious for the room. I mean, when you have, you know, 5 people with no house or whatever it would turn out to be, 1/3 of that, it makes a little difference when they're right there, you know, but it's easy when we can see it on TV or we're a little bit more distance from it, right? So this internal external justice, you know, the justice, the rightness between us and God, the right ordering between us and society, then connects to when Christ, if you read in Matthew, when Christ, the lawyer comes to Christ and says, what are the two, what's the greatest commandment? They're trying to piss him off. If you read the whole chapter, they're just drilling him with 100 things. They're trying to trip him up. And he just always turns it around on them. So he says, hey, look, he says, you want to know what the greatest commandment is? Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your body, your whole soul, your whole mind. Because that's the greatest. And the second one is just like it. Love the neighbor as yourself. In those two things, everything is covered. Well, that's what's here, you know. This is covering internal justice, connecting to the first great commandment, not commandments 1 through 10, right? But what he's calling the 2 great commandments, and external justice, you cannot say that you love your brother without doing something for them. It can't just be left, well, I'll pray for you, right? So, you know, we always say, you hear everybody likes quoting St. Francis that you should always evangelize and when necessary use words because nobody feels comfortable talking about their faith. Just live it. But this would be it. Now, could you imagine if, you know, this is why I started the course out by saying, why are more people attracted to this faith? Me? You know, could you imagine living radically, you know, like this? Even if people wouldn't agree with what you believe, they would say, those people know what they're talking about. You get a little bit of this with the Amish, right? I mean, there's issues I have with some of those communities, but you can't beat those people know how to reach out to others. Nickel Mine, remember the shooting at Nickel Mine, the little Amish schoolhouse? You guys remember that story? So the gunman goes in and, you know, I don't know how many poor children in this Amish community were shot. The people who lost their children went and made meals and raised money and brought it to the wife of the guy who did the shooting because they knew that she had issues too. You know, what an example that is. It doesn't matter if you like their particular style of living and belief or not. You got to admit, they nailed it. They nailed it, right? So that type of thing, okay? So that's what we're talking about here when we say this active solidarity. It has to show up somewhere, and if it doesn't, like if you don't have this, then how could you have that? We're almost back to the works, you know, are we saved by works? Are we saved by faith alone? How, you know, from a Catholic ethos standpoint, how do you separate those two things? I mean, how can you have that and not this? Yeah, but this only is a result of that. Okay, whatever. These things both need to be there, you know, rather than get tied up in semantics. Okay, so Catholic social teaching. Here on out, CST. It's a lot easier than trying to say it, all right? First off, we're not trying to create a utopia. I've already spent some time explaining about the city of heaven and the city of earth, right? Earthly city. There's only so many expectations we can have here. But that doesn't mean we throw our hands in the air and say, ah, crap, we got what we got, right? We're always trying to build on this, right? So when I'm saying about not organized, I'm talking about society. Okay, Catholic social teaching doesn't come in. So if somebody says you have an issue with state-church relationships, this isn't about trying to make church doctrine state of civil law. This is coming in and saying that, you know, the inside has to inform the outside. And you can't be a split schizophrenic personality when it comes to how you live in the world, right? So it's not about organizing society. It's about challenging, guiding, informing, like individuals and society as a whole. Because, you know, remember how we said your conscience is often something collective, like it's always a conscience with a community? Well, it's the same thing here. So we're very concerned, you know, what is this community that's forming our consciences? I mean, we have a lot of stuff going on. It just, I mean, it almost seems like there's another mass shooting, like every so many weeks something else happens. And you keep thinking to yourself, how in God's name is this going on, right? You know, we don't have any sure answers. It's easy for us to say, well, there's a lack of peace and leads to injustices. That's true. But it's at least good to at least start there. And then where is this coming from? I don't know. Again, just a little bit of a side, all right? So what happens is, you know, in Catholic social teaching, you see what are the demands that are required of us, right? We can call those maybe needs, but we often talk about it in terms of demands. And then we place a value, like there has to be a hierarchy of value, right? I mean, you know, we might want to have a good minimum wage, but we got to feed people first. I mean, even in triage, you know, they walk into a situation and they see what needs things first. So we see what demands there are, and then we have some sort of value system that we place on those, but it has to lead to action. It can't lead, you know, good ideas don't just stop, like, here's my idea. And the thing what I would like is, like, how cool would it be is if whatever field you go into, I've said this a few times, if you can get extremely creative and find a way to make some difference in that field, not just succeed in it, because we all want to succeed in our field. What if you didn't care so much about the actual financial success, but you said, I'm going to find a way to revolutionize this so it works better? And I don't care what you go into, right? You can go into making eyeglasses. I'm going to find a cheaper way to get frames and eyeglasses that people can't afford it. You know, I'm going to go into insurance. I'm going to find out a way to, you know, to break the system where everybody gets 8%. I'm going to find a way to get people who can't afford insurance to get it. You know, I mean, there's always ways to do it. It's going to take some real creativity. It's going to take a person that says, I really want to try this, right? So what we're trying to do is two things, right? Whatever is missing or disordered in society, trying to reorder it and get it right. That's part of Catholic social teaching. We've got to fix what's broken, right? But then there's also good things that need to be strengthened. It's not all bad. So those things have to be strengthened. Which is why, you know, you even see, like, in economic things, like tax provisions or tax credits for children, like in families. That's good, because it's giving, it's not penalizing people that have children. It's like, you got bills that people don't have. So maybe we should give you some sort of, you know, earned income credit for your, you know, according to your children. But nonetheless. Okay, so we have a few terms, and these aren't the first time you're probably hearing about them. But everything that we focus on, we'll talk in terms of the common good. So what is the common good? This is the sum total of conditions. And it's vague because it has to be vague. It's a sum total of conditions that's going to allow us, even as individuals or as a group, you know, to achieve our, you know, goals more fully and easily. So the sum total of conditions in society or as individuals that's going to allow us to achieve those goals more easily and more fully. But do you see, the problem there is you need to know what's good for the human person. So, you know, if we don't know what's good for the human person, and then how do we go towards the common good? Because we have to say, what is good for the common individual? You know, what is the common man? Which is, you know, anyway. Okay. Part of this, and I'm not going to get into it too deeply, is I'm trying to think if there's a better place to talk about this. Yeah, there is in a second. You probably heard terms like culture of life, culture of death, right? You know, and that was John Paul II bringing up. I know it's gotten to politics, but John Paul II really brought this up. Is like, you know, we're always like, there's not a lot of neutral stuff that we can do. So in what ways are we contributing to either this going in the right direction or going the bad direction? It's often that way in your personal relationship with somebody that you love. There's not a lot of neutral. I mean, okay, yeah, you can just watch a TV show and there's nothing really that has a moral element on your relationship there. But when you do things that are interactive, they're either usually adding to your relationship or detracting from it. You know that with your goal. I mean, you guys have, maybe, hopefully, some of you have very specific goals of where you want to go with your education and future employment. So you've already thought backwards. Everything that I'm doing is going to bring me closer to that goal, or it's going to be farther away from that goal, right? And you try not to do anything that's going to hinder you towards that goal. But once we determine what these goals are collectively for the human person, then we could do the same thing. We could say whatever it is that we will get closer to allowing that goal to be achieved more easily and fully, we'll put into the category of culture of life. Anything that doesn't, we'll call it the culture of death. Now, maybe we could rephrase those and make them a little more, how do you want to say, clearer for people so they know exactly what that meant. But because it's not always just about life and death. That's the part of the problem. Okay. But in this common good, it mentioned the seamless garment in that article. And this comes from Cardinal Bernardine in Chicago. He's now passed away. This guy was a little more radical, at least in what he said. He once told a group of fundraisers that the poor need you. Without you, they suffer a lot of calamity and they suffer a lot of misfortune. And he said, but I want to tell you that you need them or you'll have no chance of heaven. That's a heck of a thing to tell your donors, right? So the seamless garment proposal, it is a unified moral system, but it takes all the social, the political, and the moral aspects of our lives, whatever falls in that category, and it says we can't pretend they're all isolated things, right? So euthanasia is not disconnected from abortion. Abortion is not disconnected from the capital punishment. Capital punishment is not disconnected from unjust wages and other things. We can connect all these things. This comes from the term when Christ was buried in a seamless garment, right? So it's the idea that these things are all connected in some way. Now, two extremes to avoid, I wanted to say there's something else, is when this is controversial for some within the Catholic Church, right? Because you hear Pope Francis talking today about we've got to stop fixating so much on abortion and other things, and then people interpret that like somehow he doesn't think those things are wrong in his eyes. I think what he's trying to say, and this was when Roe v. Wade was first passed, right? There was a fear that that would become so central in the understanding of life. This is why you've heard me say things about I'm not a big fan of slogans. Because if we're talking about pro-life, are we talking in a seamless way? Or are we talking about a very specific, narrow way, right? So then what happens is, these things, like in other words, if you're for like a higher minimum wage and for an expansion of health care, you fall into one political spectrum, right? If you're for the death penalty but against abortion, you fall in another political spectrum. And that's the danger of politics, is that in this system, you're not going to be comfortable in either one of those. The two dangers are one, you can't flatten these out, okay? By flattening them out, we have to be serious that euthanasia and minimum wage are not the same argument. It's not the same argument. They're both very important, but they're simply not the same argument. And we have to also make sure that we're not ignoring other things. If a person is opposed to abortion, what are the principles that you're opposed to it, and why are those principles not applied to the death penalty? Even though those things are different. Nobody's saying that the relationship between a convicted criminal and the state is the same as between a woman and an unborn child. But let's not pretend that those are two separate things, when it comes to a stance on an ethical position and how that position implies our morality in what we call the public sphere. So some people are uncomfortable with this because this is a little more nuanced. I like it as nuanced personally, and it covers things in a way that allows us to seem more consistent. And I don't mean that in a publicity type way, like we brand ourselves that we look more consistent, but we are more consistent, right? So we could talk on these issues and have them connected somewhere and somehow. This stuff gets very hard. Now, we're probably not going to be talking about this stuff in class here, not that I could think of. But like I told you guys before about this one, and I like using it because it's secular. This one philosophy course I'm teaching on ethics. We got over a section on abortion and life issues like that. And this is I didn't design the template of the course. I only designed the material. Almost everybody in that group, I think there's 16, I think only 2 were what we call pro-life, and I'm using that like in the general sense. So I always thought my job as a professor is to push people. I don't know where you're at. It's like I got to push you and make you think in the other direction, right? So the ones that were adamant pro-life, I was pushing them to consider the other aspects of this, the aspects of poverty, the aspects of women's autonomy, and the ones that were for it, I was pushing them. And this is the thing in morality or ethics. Everything is always determined by what we would call, and there's a purpose for me saying it's not just to make a point. It's always based on what we call ontology, like what is it, right? So if I were to say, look, there's something in the next room and I'm going to go and step on it, do I have your permission? The first words out of your mouth will be, what is it?
Well, it's living. Okay, what is it? If I tell you it's a spider, you may or may not have an issue with it. Yeah, right, stop away, right? So you have to be able to say what a thing is. And I told them, so I should bring them all, I bring them through all the philosophers, you know, here's what this person thought, here's what this person thinks. And what we conclude, they conclude, is first of all, this is a lot more dense than they thought, and none of them agreed that birth had anything to do with the determination of life. I said, I'm not aware of a philosopher that thinks that. I said, so the point is like these parameters, the knowledge that we have behind this stuff sometimes comes up. And so when we all have positions on any of these things that fall underneath this, capital punishment, abortion, euthanasia, I can go down the line. Where do we get informed by those? That's the question to ask, right? Like, again, it's only because this is a clear example. When we were talking about abortion in the class, somebody said, well, what about the life of the mother? I said, that's good. I said, that's an important thing to address. I said, now what does it mean, the life of the mother? All of them, 16 of them said, if the woman is going to physically die. I said, has anybody heard of Doe v. Bolton? Have you guys ever heard of Doe v. Bolton? Doe v. Bolton came out the same time that Roe v. Wade did in Georgia. And it defined the life of the mother, not as that, but it included psychological and familial relations. In other words, if you have 2 kids and you're working 2 jobs, and this is going to put a hell of a lot of stress economically and psychologically on you, that qualifies as a life. Okay, that's to save your life. Then you can go ahead. That qualified. They didn't know that. I said, now that may or may not change your opinion, but isn't it good knowing that? So when we go through these things, you know, we're in these hot topic issues. Like these are hot button issues. These are also central to us, right? So we have to find ways to work through these things. And my point through all of this is if we're, like when I had that chart up there, you can be as pro-life, anti-abortion as you want. If those things aren't important to you, you don't seem very legitimate in my book. You know what I mean? That's where this stuff goes. So again, let's not flatten these out. That's the danger. They're not all equal. We get it, right? Minimum wage is not the same as euthanasia. But they also are interrelated, and you can't just ignore one because it goes against a political ideology you have. You know, I'm for this and against that. So you have to find how to unify these. So that's what we mean by this is a unified moral system that's going to allow us to be consistent. It's going to also make Catholic social teaching unpopular with both sides. You know, which my book is a plus, but nonetheless, because you're not going to find a home. You could be Republican, you could be Democrat. This isn't about a party affiliation. This is about how do you fit this into that. A little bit different, right? So, and this is just something interesting, right? All this stuff that's going on, violence, you name it, everything from, you know, gun violence to just you name it. We have to ask ourselves, without like pointing our fingers or trying to pin somebody down, how is it that are we creating a culture where this stuff will thrive more? I mean, everybody always says that with the rhetoric of politics, right? Like if you have this type of rhetoric, are you going to incense people to do things that may not have done otherwise? That's probably not a half-bad question to ask. I don't know what the answer particularly is, but why can't we ask that as a culture overall? So it actually, when human life is considered cheap or easily expendable in one area, eventually nothing's going to be held as sacred, and all lives are in jeopardy. So we can ask, what does our position on the death penalty, how does it affect that? How is our position on abortion? How does it affect that? How is the position on euthanasia? How is the position on economic justice? We start asking all these questions, and we point it towards this, right? Like I remember I taught in high school, this was probably about like in 2008 or whatever. You know, we would do prayers. So you guys went to a Catholic high school, you start out each class with prayers, and I just did intercessions. It was easy. Everybody was praying for Willie. Willie died. The kid was, I know it sounds cliche, unfortunately. He was shot that morning and killed because somebody wanted the sneakers. Right. Can you imagine that? I mean, this is how far we've gone. Okay, well, you can't just fix that by changing your opinion on some topics. That's understood. And there's always going to be instances like that shine, but we have to ask ourselves, how are we contributing? And in the economic sphere overall, I mean, the reason why the economic sphere is so important is because what part of our lives doesn't it touch, right? It's not because economics is bad. Okay, so you guys already know what subsidiarity is, right? It's that a group of a higher order, should never unnecessarily interfere in the group of a lower order. But they should always be ready to offer assistance when needed. So I used this before in class. The state should do what they can to allow, like in education. There's no way that Washington, D.C. is going to say, how the high school in the Chestnut Hill area is going to function well. How could they know that? Allow that area to determine that, because they're much closer to the situation than D.C. But D.C. ought to be ready to give assistance when needed. And how could any high school know how it's best for your parents or you in the future to raise your kids? They couldn't know that. So allow the lower order community to make those decisions. But you need to be ready to support them, You need to really support them. So that subsidiarity, it doesn't do away with the safety net, but it really puts an individual responsibility in. So there again, you're bridging both political spectrums, okay? Solidarity now. This is the big one. This is not a connectedness. This is interdependence, right? So we already know we're in solidarity. We already had something about how we are in solidarity with nature, how we're in solidarity with other people, too. So it's an interdependence amongst individuals and amongst nations. There's no other way about it. Economic, political, religious, you name it. All those various systems, we have to consider how are we in solidarity on those. It all has a moral category. You cannot be a loan officer in a bank without some moral quality being attached to what you do. You can't, right? Now, what happens then, we have to watch it. It's tough to watch those TV commercials with the starving children. It's tough. And sometimes maybe we get desensitized, maybe sometimes it inspires us, who knows. But we can't allow this feeling of solidarity we have. And if we had one room with 100 people in it, and X amount of people were starving, and X amount of people were overweight, we can't allow our solidarity to simply be expressed as some vague compassion, right? Or a shallow distress. We can't keep walking the way saying something needs to be done. Something needs to be done, right? Because we're only responsible for what we can do. That's it. You're only responsible to yourself morally and in your own conscience and before God from a Christian standpoint, on what you can do. So, that's why the Sermon on the Mount is so important, right? Because it puts it all personally. When did you feed somebody? When did you give somebody water? When did you visit somebody in prison? And so on and so on and so on. It doesn't, and it's only in that way, which is why, I get, and this is just my personal opinion, I get really up against some friends I have who keep wanting to put political systems in place to make things better for people. I think that's important, right? But I keep falling back upon Alexander Solzhenitsyn when he said, we rely too much on political reforms and social systems. What we've lost is personal courage. You do it, and why? Because we want so much the comfortable life, we shoot for that first, and the second, which breaks solidarity with these people, right? What do you think? Do you see, again, I'm not trying to be overly, tough with John Lennon's lyrics, but, these things embed truth in, like, the vision that goes forward. It can't just be, let's do away with all these standards and just have one people. It sounds good, but it lacks something, right? And again, I'm not picking on that because I know that doesn't encapsulate his entire standing on social justice. And this could swing the other way too. Some churches could think that this is all that matters. This is always connected to a faith. You can't disconnect this. What do we think? What do you think about those figures? Is that a little, even if they're a little off, it's a little alarming, right? Can you imagine living on $2 a day here? And how would you do that? You would basically almost starve, right? But interesting too, though, there's a lot of statistics that I didn't put up there because I didn't want to make it about that. But in the last 3 or 4 years, the amount of cell phone use in that 100-person village, tripled or quadrupled. Isn't that something? I even heard about the in the immigrant caravan coming up, I heard that they said almost half of them have cell phones. Is that interesting? I mean, it just, but you know, somebody might right off the bat say, well, what do they have that for? If they can afford that, don't, you know. I watch that myself because, you know, these things are not, they're almost becoming part and parcel of like what we need to live. I mean, you know, how would you, I mean, at some point we could laugh about, you know, cell phones are captivating us, but, you know, we do a lot of serious business on these things. They're not just toys. I mean, maybe somebody's playing games with them, I don't know, but.
Something I was just curious about is when we were talking about like